Hi there, and thanks for coming back to the channel. And today we're going to continue talking about memory, and so continuing from last week, but this time we're going to look at some practical tips for helping to memorize. So the first thing I want to ask is, when was the last time that you tried to memorize something? I mean, it's not something that we do often, but I just wondered, have you ever, as an adult, tried to commit something to memory, like a poem, or even like something like the 13 times table? I recommend, before you help your child with their tables or other tasks, for example, that need memory, that you actually try to commit something like a poem or a table that you don't already know to memory, and that will give you the opportunity to see how that feels to use your memory perhaps in a way that you haven't used it for many years. So that's my first suggestion. And I want you now to think about, what was your reaction to the thought of memorizing something? It probably wasn't joy. So if you had a feeling of, yeah, I'm not going to do that, or that seems like too much work, or whatever your thought was, then think about your child in that circumstance. Think about how a child might feel at the prospect of having to memorize something, especially something that, you know, doesn't necessarily have any rhyme or reason to it, like a times table. In the past, it was normal to spend time memorizing things, but that's a skill that over time we've lost. And I think as the digital world becomes more and more widespread, that whole thing of spending time to commit something to memory, or as we used to call it, learning something by heart, that is something that is not really done to any great degree anymore, which is a shame, because it's useful to know things, to have them memorized. So in terms of learning and memorizing basically anything, how do you know how to talk, or how to drive, or how to read? You've memorized these things. You've memorized the words and the meanings of the words that can help you to talk and to read. You have memorized the skills that you need to drive. In actual fact, I would bet that when you see words written down, you can't stop yourself from reading them. And when you're in the car and you're driving, you probably don't think all that much about what you're doing, because these things are so ingrained in you. They're completely second nature. But these are things that you've memorized. You've memorized those words. You've memorized their meanings. You've memorized what they look like and how to spell them. And you've memorized the skills that you need for driving. You might not remember the process. I don't remember at all anything about learning to read. I don't remember anything about learning my tables, but I do know that now I can read, and I do know my tables. I remember a little bit about learning to drive, but I suppose that is because it happened more in adulthood. It didn't happen when I was 17, 18, sort of the cusp of adulthood. So I remember bits and pieces. I don't remember it in great detail. Well, how do we learn, and how did you learn? How did I learn these skills and that knowledge? And the answer is very straightforward. It was just repetition, doing something over and over and over again. And some things are harder for some people, and some things are easier for some people, like learning to drive. Some people learn to drive very quickly. The skills come very naturally to them. And for others, they need to work at it and they need more lessons, and they sit their test and they fail, and they sit their test and they fail. But it's all repetition. What gets us to that, to the point of passing our driving test, what gets us to the point of being able to read more or less any word, even if we've never seen the word before, it's repetition. It's doing something over and over and over again. Sometimes, in modern parlance, that is called overlearning. But overlearning is just jargon for committing something to heart, working at it until it is in there. Now, currently I'm working with a child and we're working together on the 7 times table. I say together, I already know the 7 times table. Now, at the same time that this child is working on the 7 times table, I'm learning the 13 times table. And what that means is I'm showing her the skills that I'm working on. I'm showing her the time that I'm taking while she is working on the 7 times table. And we're testing one another and we're helping one another. Okay? So, we're just at the beginning of that journey, but I expect that in a few weeks' time, she'll know her 7 times table. Now, here's the thing. The 7 times table, in my opinion, is far and away the most difficult of the tables up to 12. There are no patterns in it. It's in the middle, you know, it's not one thing or another. It's just a difficult table, and essentially you have to memorise the numbers in it. So I think that's a good way of working on it. I'm feeling the same way that she's feeling. I'm having to work at memorising the 13th times table, and the 13 times table also has no patterns to it. So that makes it as hard as the 7 times table. Okay, therefore, my first suggestion would be, when you're helping your child with a table, why don't you at the same time learn a different table? I'm suggesting the 13, but you can do basically, perhaps you're not so good at your 12 times table. I mean, the 11 times table is too easy to bother with, but perhaps you could, if you didn't properly ever learn the 12 times table, well, now's a good time to do that. In fact, if that is the case, you could learn the 12 times table together. Okay, and once you've both got your table sort of semi-fixed in your mind, that's the point at which you want to start, at random times of the day, recalling it. So the best time is just before you go to sleep, because then it stays with you all night, and you can, if you've got it again in the morning, you've got it. So spend some time very focused on the particular table, and, you know, encourage your child to spend some time very focused on their whichever table they're doing, and then come back to it. When I say very focused, it shouldn't be time consuming. I would say 10 minutes a day max on that, with that very focused time. And then once you kind of feel like we're more or less there, then it's 5 minutes a day, just repeating it, recounting it, recalling it, reviewing it, revising, and then add another table, add another table, add another table. The reason that we're doing the 7 times table is just that reason. It's the hardest table, and it gets it out of the way first. And if someone can learn the 7 times table, they can learn any table, because the 7 is the hardest. Okay, thank you for watching. Next week, we're going to look at another practical tip on memory before we move back to more specifically reading and dyslexia. Thanks very much. See you again.